In the ports of Antwerp-Bruges in Belgium and Bremerhaven in Germany, a large number of electric cars are parked, some for several months. These long-term parked vehicles basically turn the port into a parking lot, causing congestion and affecting logistics. According to a recent report by the Financial Times, high-level executives of automotive industries and the port point out that the accumulation of Chinese electric cars is the main cause of this problem. Some Chinese auto dealers did not book follow-up truck transportation before shipping the cars to Europe. Therefore, Chinese auto dealers' sales in Europe were lower than expected, so some electric cars have been parked in ports for more than 18 months, turning ports into parking lots. According to the Antwerp-Bruges Port Authority, automobile distributors are increasingly using ports as warehouses, and all major automobile ports in Europe are congested. An automotive logistics expert said that many vehicles unloaded from ships have been parked in ports until sold to distributors or customers. In other words, these Chinese EV companies have hastily shipped large quantities of electric cars to Europe for sale without establishing sales networks. Recently, 2 roll-on roll-off ships from China have transported approximately 10,000 vehicles to Europe. On January 15th this year, the BYD Explorer No. 1 ship that carried 5,449 BYD EV cars held its maiden voyage ceremony at Xiaomou International Logistics Port in Shenzhen. It then sailed through the Cape of Good Hope into the Atlantic Ocean, heading for Europe. On February the 20th, the ship arrived at its first port of call, the port of Vlissingen in the Netherlands. After unloading 1,500 electric cars, it continued its journey, making a brief stop at the port of Antwerp in Belgium, before reaching the port of Bremerhaven in Germany on February the 26th, where it unloaded 3,000 electric cars. Finally, after unloading the last batch of goods at the port of Zeebrugge in Belgium on March the 3rd, it set sail back to China. From the route, it can be inferred that these BYD new energy vehicles will mainly be sold in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. The Explorer No. 1 is BYD's first car roll-on roll-off ship, measuring 200 meters in length and having 7,000 standard car spaces. The ship was built by CIMC Rafaels, a subsidiary of China International's Marine Containers. It was made for the international ship management company Zodiac Maritime and leased to BYD. It is reported that to meet the transportation requirements of BYD vehicles, BYD will put another 7 roll-on roll-off ships into operation in the next 2 years. Reports from Chinese media indicate that the successful return of the Explorer No. 1 marks the opening of a large-scale sea route to Europe. It indicates that BYD can expand its scale through overseas sales and further reduce production costs. However, as a CCP propaganda tool, Chinese media does not report that these BYD EVs that arrived in Europe have not been sold and are simply sitting at the port. Just 2 days later, on January the 17th, the first car carrier from SAIC Group set sail from Shanghai Haitong International Automobile Terminal. Named the SAIC NG Sincerity, this 200-meter-long, 38-meter-wide, 13-story-high ocean giant has 7,600 car spaces and a displacement of over 40,000 tons. After loading in Shanghai, it sailed to various ports in China before heading to Europe with nearly 5,000 cars from SAIC, Dongfeng and Yutong, half of which are EVs. Among them are also 634 Shanghai MG electric cars. The ship arrived at its first stop, Derens Port in Turkey, on March the 2nd. After unloading about 2,400 cars and construction machinery, it continued to the port of Livorno in Italy. It is reported that amid the congestion at major ports in Europe, Many Chinese automakers, such as BYD, Great Wall, Chery, and SAIC, are planning to export more cars to Europe to maintain operations at their factories in China. However, these car companies' overseas expansion efforts are facing numerous challenges. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal on March the 12th, BYD replaced Tesla as the world's largest electric vehicle seller at the end of last year. However, senior executives at BYD stated that their overseas expansion efforts have failed. Problems include weak market demand, high pricing, quality control issues, and BYD's market share capture speed. They said that the company lacks experience, which is reflected in some of the problems that have emerged. For example, in January 2024, a BYD bus caught fire in London, prompting the British authorities to recall nearly 2,000 BYD electric buses. After investigating the cause, the authorities pointed out problems with the vehicle's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, which could cause spontaneous combustion if left unattended. Additionally, an internal document revealed how many times passenger cars exported from China need to be repaired or serviced before being sold to consumers. Some vehicles may have defects, such as dents or scratches during transportation, and need to replace parts to meet local standards. Some Chinese vehicles arriving in Europe even contain mold. Mold can grow in cars during long-distance transportation, but Chinese automakers apparently did not undergo professional ionization to completely remove mold spores before transport. Logistics is also a major problem plaguing Chinese automakers. According to local industry executives, many Chinese automakers severely lack logistics establishments. They are starting from scratch to build teams in Europe to cope with logistics challenges. The second busiest automobile port in Europe, Bremerhaven in Germany, is operated by BLG Logistics. They state that the length of time vehicles stored at their facilities has significantly increased since the German government stopped subsidizing the purchases of EVs in December last year. So these reasons have led to poor sales of BYD electric vehicles. According to sales data compiled by UK Automotive Business Intelligence, JTO Dynamics, BYD sold only 16,000 vehicles in Europe in 2023, which is below the internal target set for Europe last year. Insiders revealed that by the end of 2023, more than 10,000 BYD passenger cars were still parked in European warehouses. These so-called European warehouses are likely the docks of major automobile ports. However, this port congestion will not be solved quickly and may even worsen. According to reports from China, some large Chinese car companies are racing against time to build their own ocean car transport teams to meet the demand for electric vehicle exports. Chinese shipyards are reportedly working hard to build larger ships. According to a company engaged in ocean car transport, within the next 3 years, 14 car carriers with 7,600, 7,800, and 9,000 car spaces will be added to their fleet, with orders for roll-on, roll-off ships from shipyards are already scheduled until 2026. In recent years, not only BYD and SAIC, but also Chery, GAC, and other Chinese automakers have successfully established ocean fleets, accelerating their entry into a new stage of independent shipping. In 2021, SAIC Group established a roll-on, roll-off shipping subsidiary. In 2022, Chery Group and its subsidiary Wuhu Shipyard set up a car carrier construction based in Weihai. GAC Business and China Merchants Steam Navigation Company also invested in establishing Guangzhou China Merchants Roll-on Roll-off Logistics Company. Behind the continuous expansion of China's independent ocean fleets lies the rapid growth of China's automobile exports. According to data from the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, in 2023, China's total automobile exports reached 4.9 million units, an increase of 58% year on year, ranking first globally for the first time. Among them, exports of new energy vehicles reached 1.2 million units, an increase of 77.6% year on year. In 2023, SAIC Group's overseas sales reached 1.2 million units, ranking first among Chinese automakers in terms of export volume, with Chery Group ranking second with 937,000 units. BYD had the fastest export growth rate, with exports reaching 252,000 units in 2023, an increase of 3.3 times year on year. Although these figures seem encouraging, how many of these cars are parked at major overseas ports remains unknown. Chinese EV brands have rapidly overtaken overseas markets thanks to its cost advantages, which are inseparable from the huge subsidies provided by the Chinese Communist government. China began subsidizing EVs heavily in 2009. Based on battery ranges, a car could receive up to 50,000 RMB in subsidies, a policy that continued until 2022. The central government provided a total of 150 billion RMB in subsidies to EVs over the 13-year period. There were also subsidies from local governments, including funding, taxation, and land use, which were no less than those from the central government. In other words, before 2022, for every EV produced, companies could receive up to 120,000 RMB in subsidies from the government, a staggering figure that exceeded the cost of making a car for many automakers. Guo Jun, editor-in-chief of the Chinese Epoch Times, summarized that the Chinese government's subsidies for EVs have two main characteristics. The first is that they started early. While other countries were still debating whether to develop EVs, China began massive and comprehensive subsidies in 2009, which led to a large number of companies rushing into this field to compete for subsidies, thereby stimulating the rapid expansion of the supply chain. This has given China a huge advantage in the EV manufacturing industry. The second characteristic is that all subsidies go to companies, which is the opposite of subsidies in Europe and the United States, where subsidies go to consumers. Of course, China also has subsidies for consumers, such as license plate fees and other tax benefits, but the main subsidies go to companies. So China has seen the emergence of more than 200 EV manufacturers over the past decade, competing fiercely with each other, making them highly competitive even internationally. Although the subsidy policy officially ended in 2022, various forms of disguised subsidies continue. During this year's two sessions, Xi Jinping also proposed the concept of new productive forces, with EVs being the center. So the EV industry is still vigorously supported by the CCP and aims to expand its scale and influence to occupy the global market. However, while the CCP government's subsidy has promoted the rapid development of the industry, it has also led to overcapacity, and competition in the domestic market is becoming increasingly fierce. Since last year, Chinese automakers have continuously initiated rounds of price wars, resulting in depressed profits. So in recent years, they have been aggressively entering the international market to digest excessive capacity and maintain factory operations. The low market entry barrier in Europe has given Chinese EVs a rare opportunity. The United States imposes a 27.5% tariff on Chinese-made cars, while the tariff rate in the European Economic Area is only 10%, especially since the European Union decided to stop selling new fossil fuel cars by 2035. Many European countries have provided high subsidies to consumers for purchasing EVs. Coupled with strong purchasing power of European consumers, this has led to a wave of Chinese EVs entering the European market. Belgium, the UK, and Germany are the top 3 destinations for Chinese EV exports. According to data compiled by the Atlantic Council, a Washington-based think tank, China's export of pure electric vehicles grew by 70% last year, reaching a total value of 34.1 billion, with nearly 40% going to the EU and 15% to other European countries. Alicia Garcia Herrero, chief economist for Asia Pacific at French investment bank Natixis, stated that China's significant entry into the European market for EVs has 2 main reasons. First, these vehicles receive subsidies, giving them a significant price advantage. Second, China has highly advanced production capabilities and a mature production model, placing it in a leading position. This essentially helps them have efficient capacity and lower costs, but technically these products are indeed subsidized. China's low price dump of EVs in Europe has become the biggest threat to European automakers and has also raised alarms in the EU. Last October, the European Commission launched an anti-subsidy investigation into whether China's support for car manufacturers gives its industry an unfair advantage. This could potentially result in anti-dumping and anti-subsidy duties on electric cars from China. The European Commission announced that it has selected 3 Chinese automakers, BYD, Geely, and SAIC, through sampling for investigation. Earlier this year, investigators from the European Commission arrived in China, visited the locations of these 3 Chinese automakers, and launched an anti-subsidy investigation. The investigation results are expected to be announced in November, but the European Commission may implement temporary tariff measures earlier, possibly as early as July of this year. The German Institute for Global and Area Studies, GIGA, released a new study on April the 10th, indicating that Beijing heavily subsidizes domestic industries, particularly in green technology sectors such as electric cars or wind power. It is estimated that China's subsidies are 3 to 9 times higher than those of other OECD countries, such as the United States or Germany. One of the main beneficiaries identified is BYD, leading to significant expansion of its technology and production capacity, enhancing its competitiveness. For example, the Kiel Institute estimated that direct subsidies to BYD amounted to approximately $239 million in 2020. These direct subsidies surged to $2.3 billion in 2022, with the cumulative total reaching around $3.7 billion from 2018 to 2022. In terms of business revenue, direct subsidies increased from 1.1% in 2020 to 3.5% in 2022. The research indicates, additionally, BYD receives significantly more purchase premiums for electric cars in China compared to other domestic manufacturers like GAC or foreign companies producing locally, such as Tesla or VW's joint ventures. This enables BYD to rapidly dominate the Chinese market and expand into the EU market. However, the Chinese government denies the effect of subsidies. According to a recent report by Reuters, Chinese Minister of Commerce Wang Wentao tried to change the US and European views on China's EV industry and policies in a recent European visit. On April the 7th in Paris, Wang met with Luca Di Meo, the CEO of Renault Group and current chairman of the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. During a roundtable attended by Chinese automakers BYD, Geely, and SAIC, they discussed the focus of the European Commission's investigation into China's unfair EV subsidies. Wang argued that Chinese EV manufacturers rely on sustained technological innovation and advanced local supply chains. He asserted that they do not rely on subsidies for competitive advantage and accused the EU investigation of being protectionist. In response to France's support for the EU investigation, China has also initiated an anti-dumping investigation into imports of brandy. On April the 8th, Wang met with France's Minister of Economy and Finance, Bruno Le Maire, in an attempt to ease trade tensions resulting from respective anti-dumping investigations. Regarding the two disputes, Wang explained that China's investigation into brandy was at the request of Chinese manufacturers, and it may not necessarily lead to anti-subsidy tariffs. Regarding the EU's investigation into Chinese electric cars, Le Maire stated that the investigation was conducted independently by the European Commission, and France will take a stance based on the results. While Wang was visiting Europe, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was visiting China, focusing on the issue of excess capacity in products such as electric cars, batteries, and solar panels. Due to subsidies from Beijing, capacity far exceeds domestic demand in China, which threatens jobs in the US and other countries. Yellen calls for China to address the issue properly. She warned China not to stimulate its economy through mass production of cheap goods, stating, "If policies are oriented only at generating supply and not also at generating demand, global spillovers will result." On April the 9th, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, emphasized in a speech before a meeting of the German Employers Association that Europe must engage China in firm dialogue regarding its unfair trade practices. Her remarks echoed a similar call made by the US Treasury Secretary Yellen just a day earlier. She also urged German leaders to take a strong stance against China's unfair competitive practices. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is set to visit Beijing shortly. China's export of excess capacity has become a major focal point in the current diplomatic tensions between the CCP and the West. In face of accusations from Europe and the US, the CCP's consistent approach has been to evade and deny. However, the number of Chinese EVs parked at major European ports is a clear manifestation of China's dump of excess capacity. Additionally, the construction of numerous roll-on, roll-off ships further reflects the CCP's ambition to dominate the global economy.